Snow falls on a girl who has just lost everything. Behind her, a door swings shut, and it will not open again. 3 weeks ago, she buried the last person in the world who loved her. And now, a colder voice has told her to go, to gather her sack and her few thin coins, and walk out into the cruelest winter these hills have ever known. No home, no family, no place anywhere that will take her in. Only the cold, closing in around her. The town watches her stand alone on its frozen street, and it turns away, certain of how this ends, certain she will not live to see the spring. But the hardest winters have a way of revealing what a person is truly made of. And high in the dark hills above, something is waiting, something warm. A young woman stood alone in the falling snow, a canvas sack at her feet, and the whole world turning its back on her. She was 23, old enough to know grief, too young perhaps to carry it alone. The snow came down soft and slow, settling on her shoulders like something that meant to stay. It dusted her hair. It clung to the wool of her coat, the only good coat she owned. And it did not melt, because there was no warmth left in her to melt it. In her pocket, a few thin coins, cold against her fingers. That was all she had now. A sack of clothes, a grandmother's quilt folded tight, a small wooden box with a ring inside, and a lock of her father's hair. And the coins. That was the sum of a life. She had not always stood on the edge of a frozen street with nowhere to go. Once there had been a farmhouse with light in the windows, a father who hummed while he mended fences, a kitchen that smelled of bread and wood smoke and something close to safety. But her father had grown sick in the autumn, and the sickness did not let go. 3 weeks ago, they had buried him, and the woman who married him late in his life, the woman who shared his name but never his heart, had wasted no time at all. Her stepmother's voice still rang in her ears. The farm is mine now. The older woman had said it without flinching. Hair pulled back so tight it seemed to stretch the kindness right off her face. His will was clear. Everything goes to the wife. You are not the wife. You are not even blood. Find somewhere else to be. The young woman had tried to argue, had said the only thing that mattered. This is my home. I was born in this house. But the answer came back like a door swinging shut. It was your home. Now it is mine. And just like that, it was over. She had spent her last night under that roof packing in the dark, careful not to wake the woman who had taken everything. She took only what she could carry, the quilt, the box, the coins she had saved from selling eggs. Eggs the stepmother now claimed had always belonged to the farm. In the morning, a hired man drove her to town in silence. He did not look at her. He did not speak. He set her sack on the wooden walk, turned the wagon, and left. His task was done, and now she stood there, watching the snow fall, trying to understand how a person could lose a father, a home, and a name to belong to, all in the space of a single season. The town stretched out around her, gray and indifferent. The boarding house wanted more coins than she had for a single night. The church offered charity, but charity in that town came with a price. And the price was a kind of breaking she had already come too close to. She had no family near, none within reach. Her mother had been an only child, gone for years now. Her father's people lived too far away to matter. So she stood, and she thought, with a strange and quiet calm, about which doorway might keep the worst of the wind off her through the night. That was when the voice came from behind her. "You're the Hartley girl." She turned. An old man sat on a bench beneath the eaves of the general store, half in shadow. He wore furs that looked older than she was. His beard was white and reached nearly to his chest. And his eyes were sharp, sharper than the rest of him. They watched her the way a man watches weather he has learned to respect. "I was," she said. Her voice came out rougher than she meant. "He's gone now. My father." "I heard." The old man nodded slowly. "Good man, your father. Helped me once, long ago, when my mule went lame on a bad road. Asked nothing for it. Most men would have. He didn't." She said nothing. There was nothing to say that wouldn't hurt to speak. The old man's gaze dropped to the sack at her feet. The quilt. The way she stood, like a person braced against more than just the cold. "That woman put you out." It wasn't a question. "She says the farm is hers," the young woman answered. "The law says she's right." The old man let out a slow breath that fogged in the air between them. "Law says a lot of things," he murmured. "Doesn't make them just." He rose then, slowly, his joints protesting, but steadier on his feet than a man his age had any right to be. He looked at her for a long moment, and something in that look was different from every other look she had received that day. There was no pity in it, only recognition, one survivor seeing another. "You got somewhere to go?" he asked. "No." "Coin for a room?" She opened her hand, showed him the few thin pieces. The old man studied them, then her, and nodded once, as if she had confirmed something he had already guessed. "Name's Silas," he said. "Come with me. There's something I want to show you." A wiser girl might have hesitated. A safer girl might have stayed where the lights were. But she had spent the whole day learning that the lights of town offered her nothing at all. And this old man, with his furs and his sharp eyes and his memory of her father's kindness, was the first person who had spoken to her like she still mattered. So she picked up her sack, and she followed him into the cold. He led her out past the last buildings, where the road gave way to a trail, and the trail gave way to wilderness. They climbed. The snow came harder now. The light was thinning toward dusk, and the wind found every gap in her coat. She did not ask where they were going. Something told her the asking would spoil it. They walked until the town was gone behind them, until the only sounds were her own breath and the crunch of snow, and the old man's steady tread on the hidden path. Then he stopped. Before them rose a wall of stone and brush, ordinary in every way. The kind of hillside a person could pass 100 times and never look at twice. Silas reached out, and he pulled aside a screen of dead branches that did not look like they had been placed there by accident at all. Behind them, a dark opening yawned in the rock, not wide. A man could pass through it, but only just. The kind of door the earth keeps for itself. Found this place a long time ago, Silas said quietly. Never told a soul. Some things you don't share with people who'd only ruin them. He stepped inside. She followed into a darkness that should have frightened her, and somehow did not. The passage was narrow but smooth, the walls worn soft by water and the slow patience of centuries. It ran straight into the heart of the hill. And then it opened. She stopped. She forgot for a moment how to breathe. The chamber stretched wide around her, the ceiling arching high overhead like the inside of something vast and sleeping. The floor was flat stone, smoothed by ages, and in the center of it all, a pool of water, steaming. Gentle ribbons of mist rose from its surface and curled toward the dark above, catching what little light remained. The air was not cold here. The air was warm, soft and damp and alive, wrapping around her the way her father's kitchen once had. She had walked into winter and found summer waiting inside the earth. "Hot spring," Silas said. His voice echoed faintly off the stone. "Runs warm the whole year through. Never changes. Never stops. The heat comes up from somewhere deep. Keeps this whole place warm as a house with the fire going." The young woman stepped slowly toward the water. She knelt. She held a trembling hand above the surface, and the warmth rose to meet it, steady, patient, wanting nothing from her at all. Something in her chest cracked open, something she had been holding shut since the day they lowered her father into the ground. "Why," she whispered, "are you showing me this?" The old man watched her from the shadows, and the mist rose between them like a curtain on the first act of a different life. "Because that woman took everything you had," he said softly. "And the earth. The earth doesn't care what she put in a will." He nodded toward the steam. "This place kept me alive once, when I had nothing too. Now you know it's here." He paused. "What you do with it, that part is yours." And outside, the snow kept falling on a town that had cast her out, while deep inside the hill, in the warmth of a secret no one else knew, a discarded girl knelt beside the water and felt, for the first time in weeks, the smallest, stubborn flicker of hope. The old man did not stay long. He showed her what mattered, and nothing more. How to seal the narrow mouth of the cave with hides and a length of canvas he kept folded dry in a hollow at the back of the chamber. How to bank the warm air so it gathered close around the place where she would sleep. How to draw her drinking water from the cooler lip of the spring, where the heat had eased to something gentle on the tongue. He pointed to the corners of the place the way a man points out the rooms of a house he loves. "Sleeping there," he said. "The stone holds the warmth. Storage back in that hollow stays dry. Never freezes, not once, not ever." Then he tipped his head toward the dark curve of rock high overhead. "There's a shaft up through the stone. Lets the steam thin out so it never grows too heavy to breathe. You keep that open, always. The earth gives freely, but it likes to breathe while it does." She listened. She tucked each word away, the way a careful woman tucks away coin. And on the third morning, the old man gathered his furs. "You don't need me hovering," he said. "A person learns a place by living in it, not by being told." She wanted to ask him to stay. The asking rose into her throat, and she swallowed it back down. Because some quiet part of her understood. This was not his to finish. It was hers. "You'll come back?" she asked instead. "Now and again," he said, "to see what you've made of it." And then he was gone, down the hidden trail, swallowed up by the white, until the brush swung shut behind him and the world outside was only wind. And the young woman was alone, truly alone, for the first time in the whole of her life. The first days tested her, not with cold. The cold could not reach her here, And that was the strange, small miracle she kept circling back to, the way a tongue keeps returning to the gap where a tooth used to be. Outside, the world hardened into iron and ice. Inside, the air stayed soft and warm and faintly damp, and the spring murmured on in the dark, an old song with no words and no ending. No, the first days did not test her with cold. They tested her with silence. There was no father humming in the next room, no clatter of pans, no creak of a familiar floorboard, no voice, kind or cruel, to fill the long, hollow hours. There was only the woman, and the water, and the steam rising up into the black. And in that silence, the grief found her. It came at night, mostly, when the chamber had dimmed to almost nothing, and the last gray light had drained out of the shaft above, and the memories had nowhere left to hide. She wept then. She let herself. There was no one to see it now, no one to use it against her, no stepmother to sniff at her weakness, no town to whisper. And so, for the first time since they had lowered her father into the cold ground, she let the sorrow rise up and take her completely. She wept for him, for the sound of his voice, for the way he had hummed while he mended fences in the gold light of an autumn that was gone now and would never come again. She wept for the house she had been born in. She wept for the girl she had been only a season ago, the one who had believed, with her whole foolish heart, that the world was a place that kept its promises. And then, slowly, the weeping ran itself dry. Because grief, she came to learn, was a great deal like the spring. It rose from somewhere deep. It flowed for exactly as long as it needed to. And then, on its own time, and not a moment before, it eased and left behind something steadier in the place where it had been. She did not become happy. That word was far too small, and it lived too far away to reach. But she became something. She became resolved. And then she began to build a life. It started with the smallest things, the kind of things a person does with their hands when their heart needs somewhere to go and cannot find the words for it. On the milder afternoons, she climbed the slopes and gathered dried grass in great armfuls, carrying it back down to the cave again and again until her arms ached. She spread it thick along the warm stone where she slept and wove it into a kind of mattress, rough and fragrant with the ghost of summer, but soft enough to ease the hard rock beneath. She found flat stones and laid them across braced branches and built herself shelves in the dry hollow the old man had shown her. On those shelves she set her few belongings, the small wooden box with its ring and its lock of hair, her grandmother's quilt folded with care, a row of small things that, day by patient day, grew a little longer. She kept it clean. She kept it ordered, not because anyone would see, but because the order was a kind of speech. It said, "A person lives here, a real person, a person who has not given up." And then, almost by accident, she made a discovery that changed everything. She found that the spring would cook for her. The first time, she lowered a few eggs into the hottest heart of the pool, where the water ran strongest and the steam came thickest, and she crouched there and waited, half certain it would come to nothing. But the water did exactly what a fire would have done. It cooked them through, slow, even, perfect. And she sat on a warm rock with the steam curling soft around her face, and the thought that came to her was so strange and so large that it nearly took her breath. The earth was feeding her. It should have felt impossible. Instead, it felt like a secret the whole world had been keeping, and had finally decided to share with one cast-off girl who had nothing else left. After that, she learned quickly. She softened strips of dried meat in the warm water until they could be chewed. She steeped bitter roots into something a body could swallow without flinching. She rarely needed a fire at all, and on the few days she did, she kept it small and tucked near the entrance, where the smoke could slip out into the cold and vanish before it ever gave her away. She set snares in the hills. The first ones were clumsy, hopeless things, and they caught her nothing but her own frustration. She would walk the line each morning and find every loop empty and feel the old despair reaching up for her again. But she watched. She learned. She studied where the rabbits ran, where they turned, where they doubled back on their own trails. She read the snow the way she had once read the pages of a book, until the small prints stopped being scattered marks and started being words. And the words told her where to lay her loops. And in time, the snares began to fill. She skinned what she caught with hands that grew surer by the day, scraped the hides clean, stretched them in the warm moving air until they dried soft and supple, and let nothing go to waste. Not a scrap, not a sinew. A girl who had once gathered eggs in a comfortable farmhouse kitchen was becoming something altogether different now. Something harder, something with edges, something that could not be picked up and thrown away so easily a second time. There came an evening, after some weeks of this, when she sat by the spring with her supper and looked around at the place she had made, and hardly recognized it. The shelves, the neat stretched hides, the mattress of woven grass, the little ordered world she had built with her own two hands out of nothing but stone and patience. And she realized, with a quiet shock, that she was not afraid. She had eaten, she was warm, she was safe. She had asked no one's permission for any of it. Somewhere along the way, in the gathering and the skinning and the long silent nights, the helpless girl on the frozen street had gone, and a woman had taken her place. She had survived. And not only survived, she had made something. It was the first time in a very long while that she had thought of herself as a person who could make things. Rather than a person things were done to. When her supplies ran low, she went down to the town. She always went the same careful way, which is to say, she never went the same way twice. Where the snow lay fresh, she walked along the wind-scoured rock so her tracks would not betray the direction of her home. This was not caution she had been taught. This was caution she had learned the hard way from a single bitter lesson about exactly what people will take from you the moment they understand you have something worth taking. In town, she traded clean pelts for flour and salt and dried beans. The townsfolk knew she lived somewhere out in the hills. That much had spread, the way every small thing spreads in a small place. But where, no one knew, and she meant to keep it so. They watched her when she passed, a young woman, alone, surviving a winter that was beginning to make hard men nervous. Part suspicion, part wonder. Part the prickling unease people feel around someone doing the impossible without asking anyone's leave. She let them look, and every time she went home, to the warmth no one else could see. It was on one of those trading days that she first noticed the man. He leaned against the corner of the feed store, too still, too easy in his ease, and the back of her neck prickled before her mind had even put a reason to it. He was lean and weathered, with a trapper's hard hands and a trapper's restless eyes, a long knife at his belt, a coil of wire on his shoulder, the look of a man who made his living taking things that could not run quite fast enough to get away. His name, she would come to learn, was Hollis. He watched her cross the frozen street. He watched her trade. And when she left town by the eastern path, the way she always did before doubling back, he watched the exact place where she disappeared. She felt it. The watching. It settled between her shoulder blades like the flat of a cold hand. And she understood, all at once, that the secret she had guarded so carefully had just grown itself a hunter. For a few days, nothing happened, and the nothing was almost worse than something. Every snap of a branch made her go still as a hunted thing. Then, on a gray morning, she found the sign, a line of fresh boot prints along the ridge above her path, stopping at a place where the walker had stood a long while, looking down toward the hills where she made her home. Studying, searching. A lesser soul might have panicked, but the winter had been teaching her, and she had been a good student. So she did not panic. She thought. She thought about Hollis the way she had learned to think about the rabbits. What did he want? What did he expect to find out here? And how could she give him something else instead? He believed she had a hidden source of warmth, of survival. And he was right. And as long as he believed it worth the finding, he would keep coming, until either he found it, or she taught him there was nothing here worth the trouble. So, she would build him a story, the way she read the rabbit stories in the snow. And the story would say, here is a foolish, freezing girl, scraping by on luck that is bound to run out. Pity her, if you like, but there is nothing here to take. Over several days she laid that false trail with the patience of a woman setting a snare she could not afford to lose. She let herself be seen, from a distance, dragging real firewood up the slopes, her shoulders bowed, stacking it outside a shallow, useless overhang far from her true home. She built a crude little lean-to there in the open. She scorched the rock with a small, smoky, struggling fire and left the ashes for him to read. This, the false camp said, is how the girl lives. Cold, half-starved, burning green wood for a flame that barely keeps the death off her. She made herself a thing to be pitied, not a thing to be robbed. And on the day she suspected him near, she shivered. She walked hunched and small against a cold. She barely felt any more. It was a performance, the performance of her whole life, and she gave it everything she had. The reckoning came on a still, white afternoon. The clouds hung low. The world gone quiet the way it does before it means to snow. She was at the false camp, feeding the sad little fire, when she heard the silence change. She did not turn around. She kept her cold, reddened hands at the fire, kept her shoulders hunched, kept playing the beaten girl, while every nerve in her body sang one high note of warning. "Cold day," the man said behind her. His voice was easy, the terrible friendliness of a predator not yet sure the meal is worth the effort. "They all are," she answered, her voice tired, thin, cracked at the edges like ice. He stepped into view and let those restless eyes move across her camp. The pitiful fire, the green and smoking wood, the lean-to that wouldn't keep the wind off a starving dog. She watched him see it. She watched him weigh it. "Heard there was a girl living rough out here," Hollis said. "Folks reckon she stumbled onto someplace warm, someplace special." "Folks do like to talk," she said, and fed another stick to the fire, watching it smoke and refuse to catch. "If I'd found someplace warm, mister, you reckon I'd be out here choking on green wood?" For a long moment he said nothing. She could feel her whole careful, desperate work hanging on the thread of his next breath. "No," he said at last. "Reckon you wouldn't." And the disappointment in his voice was the sweetest sound she had heard in weeks. He poked at the edges of her story a while longer, asking sly, sideways questions, the way a man tests ice before trusting his weight to it, and she had answers for every one. She gave him a girl who was lost, failing, who by any sensible reckoning would not live to see the spring. And slowly the hunger drained out of his eyes. Because there is no profit in robbing the desperate. There is nothing to take from a person who has already lost everything. When he turned and walked away down the slope, he did not look back. She had won. And only when he was long gone did she let herself shake. Because winning did not feel like triumph at all. It felt like how very close she had come. That night, sealed safe in the warmth, she sat by the spring and let the steam drift across her face. She had protected the secret, alone, with nothing but her own wits and nerve. And yet, something sat uneasy in her chest. Because to do it, she had pretended to be helpless. She had made herself small, pitiful, performed the very thing the world already believed about her. And the strangest part was that it had felt familiar. It had felt like the old life where her worth was a thing decided by other people. She looked at the warm water glowing gold in the dark, and she made herself a promise. Never again. She would protect what was hers, but she would not shrink to do it. Not on the inside. The girl who had wept on a frozen street was gone, and whatever this woman was becoming now, it would not bow its head to anyone ever again. But the winter was not finished teaching her. It had one more lesson, and this one cut far deeper than fear. It began with a child. She saw the boy in town on a trading day, sitting on the cold stone steps of the church, his knees drawn tight to his chest, his small chapped hands tucked into his sleeves, no more than 7, his coat far too thin. And his lips had gone a color that lips should never be. She knew that color. She had seen it on her own father's face near the end. The boy's mother sat close beside him, her face the face of someone doing the hard arithmetic of survival and not liking the answer. The cold had come early and meant to stay. The wood a family could afford was not enough. And anyone with eyes could see where such arithmetic was heading. The young woman stood across the frozen street with her sack of flour held against her hip. And she felt the warmth of her secret like a great stone weight in her chest. Because she had so very much of it, a whole spring of it, a river of warmth rising up endlessly out of the deep earth, given to her freely by a strange old man who had looked at her with his sharp, kind eyes and said, "What you do with it is yours." And these people, this woman, this small, blue-lipped boy, they had so little. She could bring them there. She could open the secret like a door and let the cold ones in, and there would be warmth enough for 10 of them, for 20, for more. The earth would not run dry. The spring would not falter. It had been flowing since long before any of them drew breath, and it would go on flowing long after. But the very moment she shared it, it would no longer be a secret. And a secret, once spoken aloud, can never be unspoken again. The men like Hollis would come. The whole town would come. And the stepmothers of this world, the ones who take whatever the law will let their cold hands close around, they would come too. And the one thing that had kept her alive, the one thing that was finally, truly, completely hers, would be taken from her, just like all the rest. She stood there a long time in the cold, torn straight down the middle of herself. Her own survival on the one side, a freezing child on the other, and no easy answer anywhere at all in the long, cold space between them. She did not decide that day. She was not ready to. She bought what she had come for and climbed back up the hidden trail to her warmth, and the boy's blue lips followed her every single step of the way and waited for her in the steam when she got home and would not let her be. That night, the cave held her close and warm and safe, exactly as it had held her every night since the old man first pulled the dead branches aside. But the warmth felt different now, because she understood, at last and for the first time, that it was not only a gift, it was a weight, it was a responsibility, and she lay there in the glowing dark and could not set it down, and did not yet know, for all her hard-won strength, how on earth she was meant to carry it. The matter might have stayed there, gnawing at her in the dark, if she had not gone down to town once more, near the deep middle of that long cold, and come face to face with the very past she had been climbing the hills to escape. She was crossing the main street when she saw the fine team of horses and the finer furs piled in the wagon seat. And wrapped in a heavy coat she recognized at once, because it had once hung in her own father's closet, sat the woman who had thrown her away like something spoiled, Verna. The stepmother's eyes found her across the frozen street, and that hard face moved, quick and ugly, through surprise, then irritation, then a cold and comfortable contempt. "Still breathing," Verna said, her voice carrying sharp across the cold. A winter like this usually clears out the ones who don't belong in it." The young woman stopped walking. She did not hurry away, the way the girl she used to be would have. She turned and faced the woman squarely, and felt rising in her chest not the old fear, but a strange and steady calm. "Sorry to disappoint you," she said. Verna's eyes narrowed. "And where is it you're living? Some shed? Some cold charity caught behind the saloon, taking the church's scraps like a stray?" And here the young woman might have said a great many things. About the cave, about the spring, about the long nights she slept soft and safe, while the whole hard world froze solid. She might have thrown it all in that cruel face like a fistful of snow. But she did not. Instead, she smiled, a small smile, quiet, the kind that does not boast and does not beg and does not trouble itself to explain anything to anyone, the kind that says without a word, "I know something you don't." "I have a place," she said simply, "warm enough. Warmer, I'd guess, than yours." Verna laughed, a short, scornful bark. "My house has 2 good stoves. I've burned through 10 cords of wood already, and it isn't even the deep of the winter. Don't you tell me some hole in the cold ground keeps you warmer than that." 10 cords, the young woman repeated softly. That sounds expensive. It's comfortable. The word came out hard, defensive, a shade too quick. Unlike whatever filthy hole you've crawled into. The young woman said nothing more. She only kept smiling that small, untroubled smile. And the silence stretched, and the stepmother's easy confidence began, almost too slightly to see, to crack along its edges. Because Verna needed her to be suffering. She needed the world to be exactly the place she had arranged it to be, where the strong keep their warmth and the discarded freeze in the dark. That small, quiet smile said otherwise, and she could not understand it, and not understanding it frightened her. Somewhere beneath all the stolen furs. You'll freeze before the spring, Verna said at last, but the certainty had drained out of her voice. Mark me, they'll find you come the thaw, stiff as a fence post in some ditch. Maybe, the young woman said, and then, gently, almost kindly, but I don't think so. She turned and walked away, and left the older woman sitting in her dead husband's furs with the uneasy, gnawing feeling of a person handed a riddle she has no hope of solving. The young woman did not look back, and as the warmth of her secret drew nearer with every step, the question that haunted her settled its full weight onto her shoulders. A freezing child on the cold church steps, a whole river of warmth hidden in the silent hills, a secret that could save them all, or be torn out of her hands the moment she let it breathe. She did not have the answer yet, but somewhere in her chest, in the deep place where grief had once lived and resolve had grown to take its place, she could feel the answer coming. And she knew, with a certainty that frightened her, that the winter was not done with her. Not yet. Not by a long, long way. For a few days after the meeting in the street, the question would not leave her be. She turned it over by day, walking her snare lines, and by night, while the steam rose gold around her. And slowly, the way the spring itself worked, rising from somewhere too deep to see, an answer began to make its way toward the surface of her. She kept thinking of the old man's words, "The earth gives freely," and it did. It poured out its warmth whether she deserved it or not, whether she shared it or kept it. And she began to understand something that frightened her and steadied her in the same breath. If the warmth had been given to her so freely, then perhaps it had never truly been hers to hoard. Perhaps it had only ever been lent. She did not decide all at once, but somewhere in those quiet days, she made the woman she meant to become a solemn promise. When the cold broke, she would find a way. She would bring them in, the child and his mother, and whoever else the season had backed into a corner with nowhere left to run. Not everyone. The world would only take and take. But the ones who were freezing, the ones with nothing, she would not let this warmth keep a small boy blue-lipped on a cold stone step, while she slept soft and safe and selfish in the dark. The old man came to her once more, before the worst of it came down. She heard him on the trail before she saw him, that slow, certain tread, and when she pulled back the canvas there, he stood in the failing light, frost white in his white beard. "You've done well," he said. Not a question, not quite a compliment, simply a true thing said plainly. She made him a cup of warm water, and he drank it slow, and for a long while neither spoke. There was no need. Then his eyes drifted up, to the dark curve of the ceiling, to the shaft. You keep that open, he said again. Whatever comes. You've told me, she said gently, and I'm telling you again. Something in the weight of his voice made her look at him closely. The earth gives, girl, but what it gives can turn on you in a heartbeat if you stop tending it. A body's got to be able to breathe around the warmth. You remember that. When you're tired, when you're frightened half to death, when everything in you is screaming to close it all up tight and hide, you keep that shaft open. I'll remember, she said, and she meant it. He would not stay the night, for all that she asked him to. He had business in the town, he said, and the look of the sky did not please him. At the mouth of the cave, she heard herself speak before she could think better of it. You could stay until the weather turns. There's warmth enough, and more. The old man looked at her a long moment, something moving behind those sharp eyes she could not quite read. Warmth enough, he agreed, soft as falling snow. You've got more than warmth enough, girl. You always did, somewhere in you. The cave just gave it somewhere to gather. But an old man belongs where an old man belongs. And you don't need me. Truth is, you haven't for a good while. And then he was gone, down the trail, into the failing light, until the brush swung shut behind him. She watched the place where he disappeared a long time after. She did not know, standing there, that it would be a long and bitter stretch of days before she saw that weathered face again. If she had known, she might have called him back. But the dark came down, and she let the canvas fall, and the chance was gone. The storm did not come the way ordinary weather comes. It did not blow in across the hills. It descended upon them. The sky all that day had been the color of old beaten iron, and as the last light failed, it seemed to lower itself toward the earth, heavy and close and swollen, until the very hills seemed to crouch down small beneath the weight of it. The wind began as nothing more than a whisper in the high rocks. Then, slowly, it found its voice, and then it began to scream. She felt it through the stone itself, a deep and ceaseless moaning, low and terrible, as though the whole of the hillside had been made over into some great instrument the storm meant to play all through the night. The canvas at the cave's mouth shuddered and snapped hard against its ties. Fine stinging snow came hissing through the smallest gaps, only to vanish, melted clean away, the instant it met the warm air inside. She sealed the entrance tighter still. Hides laid over the canvas, heavy stones along the bottom edge to hold it all down against the prying wind. She worked with steady, unhurried hands, the way she had learned now to do every single thing, carefully and completely, leaving nothing at all to chance. And when at last it was done, she was safe. Inside, the spring murmured on, entirely unbothered by the violence above. The warmth held. The air stayed soft and damp and kind. And out there, in a world she could no longer see, everything was turning to white iron and screaming wind. She lay down on her woven bed of grass, warm as a child asleep in a summer meadow, and she listened to the great fury beat and tear itself to pieces against the patient hill. And she thought, with a small and fierce flicker of something very close to joy, let it come, let it do its worst. It could not touch her here. The earth itself was keeping her safe. There was nothing out there in all that cold. in all that screaming dark, that could reach down into this place and lay so much as one finger upon her. She was wrong about that, but she did not yet know how wrong. And for a while, for one whole night and the long gray day that crawled along behind it, she slept and woke and ate her eggs cooked slow in the patient heat of the earth, and was warm while the storm shook the whole world to pieces above her head. It crept up on her so slowly, so quietly, that at first she did not understand at all what was happening to her. It began as a heaviness, a dull ache, low behind her eyes and deep in her skull, of the kind a body gets from sleeping far too long, or from sitting too near a smoking fire in a shut-up room. She thought at first that she was only tired. She had not slept well, with the storm howling fit to wake the dead. So she rubbed at her temples and drank a little water and thought no more of it. But the heaviness did not lift. It only deepened. Her thoughts began to come slow and thick, as though she were trying to wade through them, as though her mind had been packed full of wet wool. When she stood, the cave tilted gently around her, slow as a boat on water, and she had to put out a hand to the wall and wait, breathing, for the world to hold still again. And the air, she began, dimly, to notice the air. It had grown thick, close, damp in a way it had never been before. The steam, which had always risen and thinned again in its endless gentle dance above the pool, was not thinning now. It was gathering. It hung low and pale and heavy over the water, a thick white cloud of it, and it pressed against her face, and it filled her lungs warm and wet with every breath she drew. And somehow, with every breath, she felt as though she had taken in a little less than her body had asked for. And then, through the wet wool that was smothering her mind, the old man's voice came drifting back to her, clear as a bell. "You keep that open, whatever comes. The shaft." She lifted her terribly heavy head and looked up into the dark, and she could not feel it. That thin, faint, blessed draught of cold, clean air that had always slipped down to her from above. The very breath of the outside world. It was gone. The storm had buried it. Up there, somewhere on the surface of the white world, the snow had drifted and packed and frozen hard over the mouth of the shaft, and in doing so, it had sealed her warm, safe, sheltered little cave, and turned it, slow and gentle and merciless, into a tomb. Terror is a strange thing. In a dull and drowning mind, it does not always come as a scream. Sometimes it comes instead as a single, terribly clear and quiet thought, cutting clean through all the wool. And the thought that came to her, swaying by the steaming pool, was this: the very thing that had kept her alive was killing her now. The warmth was still rising, still pouring faithfully up out of the deep earth, generous as it had ever been, and with the shaft sealed over, every breath of that generosity was filling the room with more steam, more warmth, more wet white air that left less and less room for the cold, clean breath she needed to live. The earth's own kindness had become the thing that meant to smother her. She very nearly sat down. That was the worst of all of it. How reasonable the idea felt in that thick and drowning moment. To simply sit, to rest a while, to close her aching eyes for just a little spell and let the warm, wet dark come folding softly over her. Her knees were already bending beneath her before she understood at all what they were doing, and it was the anger that saved her life, not courage, not yet. Anger. A hot, sudden, towering refusal that came roaring up out of the very same deep place the grief had once risen from, and the hard resolve after it. No, not like this. Not after everything she had lived through. Not smothered in the dark by the one thing that was ever supposed to keep her alive. Not made over into the very thing that woman had sworn she'd be. A stiff and frozen fool, found come the spring thaw, just as she had promised. No, not that. Never that. She forced her bending knees to lock and straighten under her. She made herself breathe, slow and shallow, taking in what little the thick air would still give. And then she made her wool-wrapped mind do the very hardest thing of all. She made it think. The shaft. She had to open the shaft. The snow was packed hard at the top of it, up there somewhere in the screaming dark. And the only way left in all the world to reach the top of it was to climb. She had explored that shaft once, in better and easier days, out of nothing more than idle curiosity. It rose from a high corner of the ceiling, a rough, natural chimney bored through the living rock, just wide enough for a body to wedge itself inside, worn here and there with the crude hand and footholds that water and time, and perhaps the old man's own younger hands, had left behind in the stone. It climbed up through the body of the hill toward the far surface. She did not know how far. She had never once gone more than a body's length up into its dark. And now she would have to climb the whole of it in the pitch black, with her head full of wet wool and her lungs full of drowning steam, a storm waiting at the top with teeth. She did not let herself stop to wonder whether she could. She thought only of the next thing, and then the next thing after that. She tore long strips from a hide and bound them tight around her hands to keep the cold rock from stealing the last of the strength out of her fumbling fingers. She tucked a short, sturdy length of branch through her belt, something to break and dig at the ice with, when at last she reached it. And then she set her bound hands to the first of the holds, and she began to climb. The first stretch was the easy part, though there was nothing easy about any of it. The rock ran slick with the warm damp rising from below, and her fingers, already weak and clumsy, fumbled and slipped on the wet stone. Twice she lost a foothold entirely and hung swinging by her hands alone over the long black drop to the floor, her heart slamming against her ribs before her scrabbling feet found the rock again. She climbed. The warm, wet air followed her up the shaft for a while, clinging to her like a hand that did not want to let go. And then, slowly, by inches, the air began to change, cooler, sharper, cleaner, and clearer. With every body's length, she dragged herself higher. The wet wool in her mind thinned a little more. Her thoughts grew a little keener, and that terrible, reasonable longing to simply let go and rest fell away beneath her, down into the dark she was leaving. But as the air cleaned itself, the cold came riding in with it. The warmth of the spring dropped away below her like something she was abandoning forever. The rock turned cold, then bitter cold, against her bound and aching hands. And from somewhere above her, growing louder with every reach and pull, came the full scream of the storm. She climbed straight up toward it, toward the very thing trying its hardest to kill her, because it was also, in the cruel arithmetic of that night, the only thing left that could save her. She felt the plug before ever she saw it in the dark. Her reaching hand, instead of finding the next good hold, met a ceiling of packed snow and ice hard and solid as the rock itself, sealing the shaft over above her head, and around its frozen edges, so faint that she nearly wept aloud to feel it, came the thinnest, finest thread of cold, clean, living air. She wedged herself as firmly as she was able into the narrow throat of the rock, braced her back hard against the one wall, and jammed her feet against the other, freed one trembling hand, drew the branch from her belt, and began to dig. It was the hardest labor she had ever done in the whole of her life. The ice was packed iron hard by the driving wind and frozen solid through by the killing cold. Her perch was a treacherous thing, and every blow she struck with the branch threatened to jar her loose from the wall and send her tumbling all the way back down into the warm and drowning dark she had fought so hard to climb out of. She dug. Her shoulders burned like fire. Her bound hands went numb, then past numb, to nothing at all. Bits of broken ice and frozen snow came raining down upon her upturned face, into her eyes, down the open collar of her coat. And still that thin thread of clean air kept coming through to her, steady as a heartbeat, like a promise, like a quiet voice saying over and over, keep going now, almost, you're almost there. She thought of the old man, and his sharp eyes, and his warning, the earth gives, but you've got to tend it. She thought of the small boy on the cold church steps, and his blue lips, and the promise she had made into the dark. When the cold broke, she would bring them in. She could not keep that promise if she died here, wedged in the black throat of the rock, and she would keep it. She would. She dug, and then, all at once, the branch broke clean through. The thin thread of air became a rushing flood. A great cold cleansing torrent of it came pouring down the shaft and into her starved and aching lungs, and she gasped and gulped and drank it down like a woman 3 days in the desert drinks water, and felt her drowning mind come roaring and singing back to life, sharp and clear and blessedly, achingly, gloriously alive. She had done it. With the very last of her strength, she widened the hole, breaking and clawing the ice away, until the cold air ran free and full and steady down the shaft, until she could feel far below her. In the dark, the heavy gathered steam beginning at last to thin and lift and breathe again. And then she clung there, wedged into the cold stone, hung halfway between the warm dark below and the screaming white above, and she shook, not with cold, with how close, how very close, the gift had come to being the death of her. She climbed back down, slow and careful, with what little she had left, knowing well that a single careless slip now, after all of it, would be the cruelest end of all. And when at last her feet found the warm stone floor again, her legs simply gave way beneath her, and she sat down hard and wept. The air was clearing all around her. The steam was thinning back into its old gentle dance, rising and fading, but she knew she would never again look upon it with quite the same easy eyes. Because she had learned a thing in the throat of that shaft, the very thing the old man had been trying his best to tell her all along, and that she had been far too warm and too comfortable to truly hear. The warmth was a gift, but no gift in all the world takes care of itself. Even the kindest thing under heaven must be tended, watched over, honored, and never taken for granted. The very moment she had let herself believe the earth would simply keep her, safe and effortless, asking no care of her in return, was the exact moment it had so nearly buried her alive. She pressed her trembling, ice-torn hands flat against the warm stone of the floor, and she made that ground a quiet and a solemn vow. She would never stop tending it. She would never take it for granted again. Not ever, so long as she lived. She slept after that, a deep and emptied sleep, with the cold, clean air sighing down the open shaft. When she woke, the storm had not broken. If anything, it had deepened, a fury that had settled in and meant to stay. She ate. She tended the shaft, learning the rhythm of clearing it, swearing never to be caught unready again. And she settled in to wait out the long white siege. She had faced the worst the winter could hurl at her and won, with her own 2 hands. She believed the danger had passed. She believed she had only to wait. She was wrong about that too, because the danger was not finished with her. It had only changed its shape. It came in the deepest part of the night, when the storm was loudest, when she had every reason to believe nothing living could still be moving out there in all that white death. It came as a sound, so small she was certain she had imagined it, so faint beneath the scream of the wind it might have been nothing. She lay still and listened, and it came again, a sound that did not belong to the wind, a knock, slow, weak, knuckles against the frozen hides that sealed the mouth of her cave. Once, twice, and then a third time, fainter than the others. The sound of something at the very end of its strength. She sat up in the warm dark, her heart pounding. No one knew this place, no one living. Not the old man, gone to the town. Not the trapper, who believed her a freezing fool. No one should have been able to find this door, and no one should have been out there at all in the screaming heart of such a storm. And yet, the knock came again, weaker still, the sound of someone freezing slowly to death, 3 feet from all the warmth in the whole wide world. She rose and stood in the glowing dark, caught between the warm secret she had nearly died to keep, and the faint, failing knock of a stranger in the storm. To open was to give the secret away, to let the unknown walk in the most defenseless hour of the night. To leave it closed was to listen to a living soul die 3 feet away. Her hand rose, trembling, toward the ties, and it stopped, and the knock came one final time, so faint it was barely a breath against the hide. And then it stopped, and the only sound left in all the world was the scream of the wind, and the murmur of the spring, and the pounding of her own heart, there in the warm and waiting dark. The knock had stopped, and it was the stopping that moved her hand, because a sound that fades is a sound that is dying. And she had stood beside one dying thing already in her short life, had held a hand as it went cold and still, and she had sworn she would never again simply let the warmth go out of a living thing if there was breath in her body to stop it. Her fingers found the ties, and they pulled. The cold came howling in, flinging snow into the warm chamber, and there, slumped against the frozen rock at the mouth of the cave, half buried already in the drift, was a shape. For one terrible heartbeat, she could not tell what it was. And then it moved, the smallest shifting, and she saw the curve of a shoulder, and the white-rimed fold of an arm, and the way that arm was wrapped, even now, even at the very end, around something smaller it was trying to shield. A woman, frozen near to death, curled around a child. She did not stop to think. She reached out into the killing cold, took hold of that frozen shape and pulled, dragging the dead weight across the threshold into the light of the glowing dark. Then she fought the canvas back into place, sealing out the storm, until the scream of the wind dropped to a muffled moan beyond the stone. And then she turned around and looked at what the storm had brought to her door. A woman, young perhaps beneath the gray of the cold, her lips the color of a bruise, her lashes frozen shut, her thin coat packed with snow, and still, even senseless, her arms locked around the small bundle against her chest. The young woman knelt and worked the frozen arms loose, and inside them, wrapped in everything the mother owned to give, was a child, a boy, small, still, so very still, and his lips were blue. She knew that blue. She had carried it in her chest for weeks, had seen it on a small face on a cold stone step. But there was no room in her now for understanding. There was only the work, the desperate work of holding the warmth against the cold. She would not put them straight into the spring. Some instinct warned her that warmth too sudden could be its own cruelty to a body this near gone. So she dragged her bed of grass to the cooler, gentler edge of the pool, laid them both into the rising warmth, peeled away the frozen coats, wrapped them in dry hides and her grandmother's quilt. And then she did the only thing left. She lent them her own warmth. She gathered the small still boy against her body and breathed her own warm breath across his frozen face and rubbed his cold hands between her two warm ones, willing the heat of the earth and the heat of her own living body down into him, down through the blue, down to wherever the last small spark of him was hiding. "Come back," she whispered, and it cracked in her throat. "Come back now. There's all the warmth in the world here. Come back to it." The vigil lasted all that long night, and she did not sleep a moment of it. She tended the mother first, for the mother was the larger and the stronger and would come back the sooner. She bathed her gray face with water warmed at the edge of the spring. She worked the frozen hair loose, and slowly, by inches, as the warmth crept back into her, the bruised color faded from the woman's lips, and a faint flush of living pink rose up beneath the gray. Her frozen lashes thawed and parted. She did not wake, but she breathed, deep and slow and even, the breath of someone who has come back from the very edge and slid down into the deep, healing sleep of the saved. The boy was harder. He was so small, and the cold had reached so deep into him, and for a long and terrible stretch of that night, the young woman truly believed she had been too late. She held him and breathed for him, and rubbed the warmth into his thin chest, and watched his small face for any sign at all. And there was none, only the stillness, only the blue, and in that hour, kneeling in the steam with a dying stranger's child in her arms, she did something she had not done since the night her father was buried. She prayed, not in words exactly. She had no words left. It was more a kind of reaching, a wordless cry sent down into the warm dark and up through the open shaft and out into the screaming night to whatever it was that made the spring rise. Whatever it was that had kept the warmth flowing up out of the deep earth for 1,000 patient years. "Not this one," the reaching said. "Please, not this small one. Take the cold from him. There was warmth enough here, so much warmth. Let it pass into him. Let it all pass into him." And whether it was the prayer or the spring, or the simple stubborn heat of two bodies pressed together in the dark, she would never know. But somewhere in the blackest part of that night, the small boy drew one shuddering, ragged breath, and then another, and then a thin, high, broken cry, and the young woman pressed her face into his hair and wept and laughed and wept again, rocking him in the rising steam. "There you are," she whispered over and over. You came back to me." Slowly the frightened crying eased into a hiccuping sob, then into a long, exhausted breath. And then he slept. A real sleep this time. A living sleep. Pressed warm and safe against the chest of a stranger. And it was only then, with the boy asleep in her arms, that she truly looked at his small face in the gold light. And she went very, very still, because she knew that face. She had seen it before, on a cold stone step, with the lips gone blue, and the small hands tucked into thin sleeves. She had carried it home with her up the hidden trail, and it had pulled the promise out of her like a thread drawn from cloth. When the cold broke, she had vowed she would bring them in. She had made that promise about this child, about this exact small boy and his mother. And the storm had not waited for the cold to break. The storm had simply gathered them up out of the freezing dark and brought them to her door. It was a promise being kept by a hand not entirely her own. She had been ready, in her own time, to go and find them when the danger passed. And instead, the danger itself had carried them straight into her arms, in the most defenseless hour of the worst night, and asked her, "Did you mean it? All those fine, quiet promises you made in the warm and the safe, did you mean a single word of them?" And she had. When the moment came, with a hand trembling on the canvas ties, she had meant it. She had opened the door. The mother woke near dawn, with a gasp and a wild surge of fear, her arms flying for the child no longer in them. "It's all right," the young woman said softly. "He's here. He's safe. He's sleeping. Look, he's warm and breathing easy. You're both safe now." The mother saw her son, pink-cheeked on the bed of grass, and a sound came out of her that was half a sob and half a prayer, and she gathered him up and could not speak for a long while. When at last she could, the story came in broken pieces. The wood had run out, the same killing arithmetic the young woman had read on the church steps. The boy had begun to fail, the warmth going out of him day by day, and she had known, the way a mother knows, that another night or two would take him for good. And so, she had done the only thing a desperate soul can do. She had gone looking for a rumor. They said there was a girl, up in the hills, a girl who'd found someplace warm. Folks laughed, said she'd freeze before spring, same as anyone. But I thought, if there's any chance at all, better to die out there looking for warmth than in here, watching him go cold in my arms. She had walked into the gathering storm with no notion of where she was going, only up toward a rumor, toward a hope so thin it was barely a hope. She did not remember finding the cave. She remembered only walking and falling in the cold, and one final refusal to lie down. And then the warmth, and then her son, alive in her arms. "You saved us," the mother said, looking at her with a wonder almost too much to bear. "You opened the door, in all that, for a stranger." And the young woman, who had once stood weeping on a frozen street with no door anywhere in all the world that would open for her, found she could not speak. She only reached out and laid her hand over the mother's, where it rested on the sleeping boy. And that was answer enough. The storm raged 3 more days, and those days changed something in her that no warmth from the earth could have changed alone. Because the cave was not empty anymore. For so long it had been only her and the water and the silence. But now there was a child's voice in the warm dark. Once the fear had left him, the boy became what small boys become, curious and tireless and full of questions. He wanted to know why the water was warm, where the steam went. He pressed his small hand to the warm stone the way she had once pressed hers, and looked up at her as though she were the keeper of some vast and beautiful secret. And she found, to her own quiet astonishment, that she was. It made the cave a home, not a shelter, not a hiding place, not a clever secret kept from a grasping world. A home, with a child's laughter in it, and a mother's quiet gratitude, and 3 bowls now, instead of 1 beside the pool, and watching the boy chase the steam while his mother slept safe at last, she felt something move in her chest that she had thought the winter had frozen solid. A loosening, a thawing, a warmth that did not rise from the spring at all, but from somewhere far deeper. Somewhere she had walled away on the night they buried her father. The boy, for his part, had decided early on that the young woman belonged to him. Children make these decisions quickly, and do not trouble themselves with the doubts that slow the hearts of grown people. He had woken in her arms from the very edge of the cold, and to his small, certain heart that settled the matter entirely. She was the one who had pulled him back, and so he followed her everywhere, into every corner of the cave, asking his endless questions, pressing his small warm hand into hers when she walked the snare lines, sitting close against her side in the evenings while she told her made-up stories into the steam. He took to calling her by a name that was not quite a name. A child's word, half invented, the sort of sound a small mouth makes for someone it has decided to love. And the first time she heard it, the young woman had to turn away toward the pool for a moment, so that neither the boy nor his mother would see what it did to her face. Because no one had needed her like that in a very long time. Her whole hard winter had been built on the proud foundation of needing no one, and being needed by no one in return. She had thought that was freedom. She had thought that was the shape of her new strength. But a small boy pressing his warm hand into hers and calling her by a name he had made up just for her was a different kind of strength altogether. A frightening kind. The kind that opens you up and leaves you with something to lose. She found that she did not mind the fear of it. She found that she would not have traded that small, warm hand for all the safe and lonely solitude in the world. She had spent the whole winter learning to survive on what the world gave her, to take what she needed and owe no one anything. And she had thought that was strength. She had thought that was the whole of healing. But here, in these storm-bound days, she learned a truer thing. It was not the warmth she had received that was healing her now. It was the warmth she was giving away. Every cold hand she chafed back to life. Every fear she soothed. Every story she told into the dark to make a frightened boy laugh. Every bowl she filled and set down beside the pool. Each one of them reached into the cold walled-off place inside her and let a little more of the light in. She had been a person things were done to, thrown away, turned out, pitied and preyed upon. And now, for the first time since her whole world had ended, she was a person who did things for others, who shielded, who fed, who saved. She was not the cast-off girl anymore. She was the one who opened the door. And she understood at last what the old man had meant, with his talk of warmth that must be tended and gifts that are only lent. The spring poured itself out freely, and that was the whole of its strength. It did not grow less for the giving. It grew more. The more it gave, the more it had to give. And a heart, she was learning, was no different. She had tried to keep hers safe by keeping it closed, and it had only grown colder. It was the opening of it, the giving of it, the spending of it on a frozen stranger and her child that was warming her now from the inside out. The days that followed had a rhythm to them she had not known she'd been missing. She had spent so long alone that she had forgotten what it was to share the small work of living. Now there were 3 of them, and the work that had once filled her solitary days with a kind of grim purpose became, somehow, lighter for the sharing of it. The mother, once the strength had come back into her, proved a woman of quiet and tireless competence. She did not sit and wait to be cared for. The moment she could stand without swaying, she was up, looking for ways to be useful, the way a proud person does when they cannot bear to be only a burden. She mended the hides that had torn in the storm. She found a better way to lay out the bedding. She had a gift for stretching a little food a long way, and under her hands the snared rabbits and the dried stores went further than they ever had for the young woman alone. And as they worked, their stories came out, slowly, one careful piece at a time. They were both of them women who had learned, the hard way, to keep their soft places hidden. But the warm dark of the cave had a way of loosening things. The mother's story was not so different from her own. A husband gone, in the way that men are sometimes simply gone, taken by hard work and hard luck, and a hard country that used people up and asked no permission. A little money, then less, then none. And the slow grinding discovery of what the world does to a woman alone with a child, and nothing to her name. "They look at you," the mother said one evening, her voice low, her eyes on the water. "When you've got nothing, they look at you like you're something less than they are, like the having of nothing is a thing you did, a fault in you, a sin almost." She turned a small stone over and over in her fingers. "I went to the church for help that first hard month, and they helped, sure enough. But the way they looked at me while they did it," she set the stone down. "A body would almost rather freeze than be looked at that way." And the young woman, who had stood on a frozen street, weighing the church's charity against a doorway in the snow, who had been thrown out by a woman who looked at her as something less than human, understood that all the way down. "I know that look," she said quietly. "I know it well." "I expect you do," the mother said, glancing at her. "A girl living alone in the hills, surviving a winter like that one. I expect you've had your share of that look and more." "More," the young woman agreed, and something passed between them then. Not pity. Pity was the thing they had both had too much of, the cold kind, the kind that looks down. This was something else. This was the warm and level look of two people who have stood in the same hard place and recognized each other across it. The look that says, without a word, "I see you. Not what the world made of you. You, and you are not less than anyone." It was, she thought later, perhaps the first time in her whole life she had truly been seen that way by another grown soul. Her father had loved her, yes, but this was different. This was being seen as an equal in the full, clear light, by someone who had every reason to know exactly what she was worth, and found her worth a great deal. It healed something in her she had not even known was still broken. But peace, even hard-won peace, has a way of stirring up the harder questions underneath it. And one evening, with the boy asleep and the storm long gone, and the world outside slowly beginning to soften toward the thaw, the mother brought one of those questions out into the open. "We can't stay," she said. The young woman looked up sharply. "I don't mean we want to go," the mother went on quickly, her hands twisting in her lap. "Lord knows there's nothing waiting for us down there but a cold room and the same hard road we were on before. But you've got a secret here, a secret that's kept you alive. And the longer we stay, the longer 2 more people know where it is, and the more chances there are that it slips. A word in the wrong ear. A trail followed. You know better than anyone what folks would do if they knew what was up here in these hills." She was right. The young woman knew she was right. It was the very fear she had carried all winter, the fear that had made her lie to a trapper and lay false trails and shrink herself small in the snow. A secret shared is a secret weakened. Every soul who knew was another crack the world could pry into. And yet, she looked at the sleeping boy. She looked at the woman who had become, in the space of a few storm-bound days, the closest thing to a friend she had known since her father died. And she found that the old fear had loosened its grip on her, somewhere in the giving of these last days. It had not vanished, but it no longer ruled her. "Let me tell you what I've been thinking," the young woman said slowly. And she told her. She told her about the boy on the church steps weeks ago, with his blue lips and his thin coat. She did not say it was him. She did not have to. The mother's breath caught, and her hand went to her mouth, and she understood at once that the young woman had seen them that long ago day, and had carried them home in her heart, and had been wrestling ever since with what she owed a freezing child she did not even know. "I made a promise," the young woman said, "up here, alone, before the storm, that when the cold broke, I'd find a way to bring the freezing ones in. Not everyone. The world would take and take, I know that. But the ones with nothing, the ones with nowhere." And then the storm came, and it didn't wait for me to keep my promise. It brought you to my door instead. She leaned forward, and the gold light of the spring moved across her face. So maybe the secret was never meant to be only mine to keep. Maybe an old man kept it most of his life, all to himself, because that was what he needed it to be. But maybe it falls to me to do something different with it, something more. Maybe the way to keep this warmth safe isn't to wall it up tighter and tighter until I die alone guarding it, but to be careful and wise and choose. To open the door for the ones who truly need it and trust myself to know the difference. "You'd risk it," the mother said. "Everything. For strangers." "Someone risked it for me," she said simply. "When I was the stranger. There was no reason in the world for him to open a door for me, but he did. And it's the only reason I'm alive to sit here now. A warmth that's only ever kept for yourself isn't worth keeping. It just turns cold in the holding. I learned that in the dark of that shaft. The earth doesn't hoard what it's got. It pours it out, free, and it never runs dry. It only ever has more to give." She lifted her eyes. "I'd rather be like the spring than like the stepmother. I'd rather pour it out and trust there'll be enough then seal it up and slowly freeze. For a long moment, the mother said nothing. Then she reached out and took the young woman's hand, the way the young woman had once taken hers, on that first desperate night. "Then you won't do it alone," she said, her voice rough but steady. "Whatever you mean to build up here, you won't do it alone. We'll stay, not to hide, to help. To be the second pair of hands that watches the trail and decides who comes in. I know how to stretch nothing into something, and I owe a debt to this place I'll be paying the rest of my days." The young woman looked at their two joined hands, and she thought about how she had come into this winter with nothing: a canvas sack, a handful of coins, a wooden box with a ring and a lock of hair, a grandmother's quilt, the whole of a life. Reduce it to what one frightened girl could carry. And she thought about how much she had now: a warmth that the cruelest winter could not touch, a purpose larger than her own survival, a child who had given her a name no one had ever called her before, and a friend, a true and equal friend, who saw her clear and found her worthy, and who would not let her carry the weight alone. She had been thrown away, and out of that throwing away, out of the cold and the loss and the long dark hardness of it, she had built something that the woman in the stolen furs, sealed up warm and miserable behind two good stoves, would never in her life understand. She had built a home that gave itself away. The storm broke on the fourth morning, the moan through the stone falling away at last into a vast and ringing silence, where for days there had been nothing but the scream. She climbed up and cleared the shaft, and the cold, clean air came pouring down, and with it the first thin light of a morning the storm had at last let through. The world the storm left behind was a hushed and shining thing. When the three of them finally stepped out together, the boy stopped at the mouth of the cave and simply stared. The snow lay deep and unbroken across the whole of the hills, smoothed and sculpted by the wind into long, soft curves, and where the new sun touched it, it threw back the light in 1,000 small fires. The whole world had been made over clean, as though the storm had wiped the old one away and set down a new one in its place, untouched, waiting. "Go on," she said softly, smiling. "It won't hurt you now. The worst of it's gone." And he went, wading out into the snow, sinking to his knees, then his waist, laughing that bright laugh that still caught her somewhere under the ribs, while his mother stood in the doorway with her hand pressed to her mouth, watching her son play in the very snow that had so nearly killed him. 3 days ago, the mother said quietly, I was sure I was carrying him to his death, and mine, and now look at him. Now look at him, the young woman agreed. It was strange, she thought, how a person could measure a whole life by such small moments. She had thought once that the great turnings of a life came marked with great events, a death, a funeral, a door slammed shut, a name and a home taken away. But standing there in the doorway, watching a stranger's child laugh in the snow, she began to suspect she had been wrong about that too. Perhaps the great turnings came quieter than that. Perhaps a whole life could turn on the simple choice of a hand on a canvas tie, in the dark, in the worst hour of the worst night, the choice to open a door or to leave it shut. And she understood the winter's worst was over now. The world would thaw, the trail would open, and she would have to go back down and face whatever the long siege had left behind. She did not know yet that the woman who had thrown her into the cold was, even now, learning the bitter price of 10 cords of wood burned away to nothing. But she knew she had gone into the storm a girl who had learned to survive alone, and was coming out of it a woman who had learned something far harder and far better, that a door is only truly worth having if you are willing to open it. Below her, in the warm gold light, a small boy laughed at something his mother said, and the sound rose up through the stone and reached her where she stood. And for the first time since the snow first fell on a girl with nothing standing alone on a frozen street, she felt all the way down to the bottom of her thawing heart that she had finally, truly come home. The spring came the way forgiveness comes, slowly, and then all at once. For weeks the world only softened at its edges. And then one morning she woke to a sound she had not heard in a long time. Water, running water, everywhere. The deep snows letting go their hold at last, the whole hillside weeping itself awake. The air that came down the shaft no longer the hard knife of winter, but something green, something that smelled of mud and melt and growing things. The trail down to the town lay open now, dark against the retreating white. She went alone, that first time, the mother staying behind to keep the warmth and watch the trail, and she walked down into a town the long winter had changed. It was quieter than she remembered. A town that the cold has tested is a town gone quiet. There were gaps along the street where there had not been gaps before. Doors shut and dark with no smoke rising. Faces in the windows watching her pass with a thin, drawn, hollowed-out look. The look of people who had spent everything they had just to see the spring, and were not yet sure it had been worth the price. She did not need to be told what the winter had cost. Some had endured, some had not. And the town that came out the far side was a smaller, soberer, more careful thing than the one that had gone in. Of the trapper who had once hunted her secret, there was no sign now. The hard winter had driven men like him on toward easier country, and the false trail she had laid had held to the very last. One more shadow the cold had quietly carried off, and she found she did not waste a single thought mourning him. She traded her pelts and bought what she had come for, and it was the man at the store who told her the rest, in the flat voice of someone passing on news he no longer found surprising. The woman up at the old place, the one who'd come into the farm. She was gone, lost it, all of it, burned through every cent she had, keeping those big stoves fed through the worst of it. Wood went dear as gold once the roads closed, and she paid it, until there was nothing left to pay with. The note came due in the deep of the winter. She couldn't meet it, and the land went back to the ones who held the paper on it. She packed what the cold had left her and went off east, looking for kin or charity, or whatever a person looks for when they've nothing else left to look for. Hard winter, the man said with a shrug. Took a lot of things. Took her too, in its way. And then he went back to his counting and left the young woman standing in the quiet store with the news settling over her like the last of the falling snow. She had imagined this moment more than once through the long, cold months. On the worst nights, she had let herself imagine the woman who had thrown her away getting some measure of what she had earned, and she had imagined how sweet it would taste. It did not taste sweet. That was the thing she had not foreseen. She searched herself for the triumph, almost wanting it, and it was not there. Where she had thought to find sweetness, she found only a weary sadness, the flat gray weight of watching even a cruel thing brought low. Because she knew now what it was to lose everything in a single hard season. And whatever else Verna was, however richly she had earned the turning of her fortune, she was, in the end, only one more soul cast out into a cold that did not care who deserved its mercy and who did not. The early thaw was when the legacy began, though no one called it that then. It was a small and quiet thing at the start. It began with the mother, who knew the town and its hard cases as the young woman never could, and who had a sharp, clear eye for the difference between a soul in true need and a soul looking to take. There was a widow at the edge of town whose roof had half fallen under the weight of the snow, and who had no one and nothing, and would not see another winter in that ruin. There was an old man, alone, whose mind had begun to wander, and who could no longer be trusted near a stove. There was a family burned right down to the bone of their savings, hanging on by their fingernails, one bad turn away from the cold. And slowly, carefully, choosing each one, the two women began to keep the promise, not all at once, not openly. The young woman had not forgotten the trapper, or the lesson of the false trail, or the hard truth that a warmth carelessly shared is a warmth soon stolen, but a warmth carefully given to the right souls in the right way. That was a different thing. They brought them up the hidden trail, the chosen ones, the freezing and the forgotten. They warmed them by the patient spring. They sent them back down stronger, with full bellies and thawed bones, and something the town had stopped offering them long ago. The simple feeling of having been treated as though they mattered. And the chosen ones kept the secret. Every one of them, the way people keep a thing that has saved their lives. They guarded it as fiercely as the young woman did, because it had become theirs too. The way the warmth had become hers on the night an old man pulled the branches aside. And so a strange and quiet thing began to take root in those hills. A warmth that gave itself away and grew no smaller for the giving. A door that opened and opened and opened for the ones the world had shut its own doors against. The young woman was no longer the cast-off girl in the hills. She had become, without ever setting out to, something the town had no word for. A keeper, a warmth giver. The one you went to, quiet and careful, and by word passed hand to hand, when the cold had backed you into a corner and there was nowhere else on earth left to turn. It was on one such day, late in the thaw, that the past came walking up her trail. She saw the figure from a distance, thin, laboring up the muddy path, and for a long moment did not know her. The fine furs were gone. The proud straight carriage was gone. The figure that climbed toward her was bent and worn and moved with the slow, uncertain step of someone no longer sure of their welcome anywhere in the world. And then it lifted its head, and she saw the face beneath the worn shawl. It was Verna. She had not gone east after all. Or she had gone and found nothing, and come crawling back. It hardly mattered which. What mattered was that the woman who had thrown her out into the snow with a sneer now stood swaying at the bottom of her trail, beaten, asking with her whole ruined posture for the one thing she had once refused to give. And the young woman felt the old anger rise. It was all there, every cold word, every cruel turning, the will read out, the furs taken, the door shut, the snow falling on a girl with nowhere left to go. And for one sharp instant, the sweetness she had searched for in vain in the quiet store came flooding into her at last. Here it was, the cruel woman, ruined and begging, at the bottom of a hill that held a warmth she would never be allowed to touch. The young woman could send her away. She could speak the very words that had been spoken to her. Find somewhere else to be. You're not my concern. She could let the cold finish what it had started, and it would have been just. By every measure, the world used to reckon such things perfectly just. And she stood there with the power to do it, and the right to do it, and the old hurt screaming in her to do it. And she thought of the spring, of how it poured itself out into the dark, free, to whoever came, and never once reckoned who deserved its warmth and who did not. And she thought of the thing she had vowed, with a stranger's child asleep in her arms. Better to be like the spring than like the stepmother. The old anger did not vanish. She did not pretend even to herself that it vanished. But she looked at it clearly and understood at last what it truly was. It was a door she could open into bitterness, into the long, cold satisfaction of becoming, at last, the very thing that had hurt her. Or a door she could leave shut. She left it shut. You'd best come up out of the cold, she said. Her voice was steady. It was not warm, not yet. It did not pretend the past away, but it was not cruel. There's warmth at the top, and food. You look like you've had little enough of either. Verna stared at her, and the young woman watched the disbelief move across that worn and hollowed face, watched her brace, even now, for the trick, for the cruelty, for the cold word she herself would surely have spoken if their places were reversed. And when it did not come, when the young woman only turned and led the way up toward the warmth, something in the older woman broke that the loss of the farm had never managed to break. She began to weep. She wept the whole long climb, silently, the tears cutting through the grime on her face, and did not say a word, because there were no words yet equal to the thing happening inside her. It was only later, warmed and fed, sitting hunched and small by the glowing pool in the very place she had once sworn would be the death of the girl she'd cast out, that Verna found her voice. I don't understand you. I took everything. I put you out to die. I wanted you to die, girl. I won't lie about it. Not here. Not after this. I stood in that wagon and I wanted the winter to take you, because as long as you were suffering, I could tell myself I'd been in the right. She shook her head. And now I'm the one with nothing. And you brought me up here. You fed me. You warmed me. Why? After what I did. And the young woman looked at her a long moment. She did not offer easy comfort. She did not say it was all forgotten, because it was not. And a lie would have cheapened the truth of what she was choosing. She did not say the wound did not still ache, because it did. Because someone has to stop, she said at last. Somewhere, the cold has to stop being passed from one set of hands to the next. You were cruel to me because the world taught you that cruelty was how the strong kept what they had. And if I send you back down that hill to freeze, then the world taught me the same lesson, and I learned it, and I'm no different from you. Just luckier, just warmer. She looked at the steam rising soft and endless from the pool. I won't be that. I'd rather lose every just thing the world owes me than become the woman who taught me how to be cruel. The warmth that saved my life didn't ask if I deserved it, so I won't ask it of you. That's the whole of it. Verna wept again then, but it was a different weeping, and when it passed, she said the words the loss of the farm could never have wrung from her. I'm sorry for all of it. I'm so sorry. It did not undo a single thing, and they both knew it. The dead stayed dead, and the lost years stayed lost, and the wound stayed a wound, even healing. But it was real, and it was enough. Verna did not stay in the hills. She was not one of the ones who belonged there, and they both understood it without it needing to be said. But the young woman saw to it that she had a place down in the town, an honest place, and the means to live without burning through it, and the chance to become, in whatever years were left to her, something other than the woman she had been. And once, before she went, Verna asked the question the young woman had been waiting for. The farm, the ones who held it now would let it go cheap after a winter like this one. She could buy it back, take back what was hers. It would be only right after everything. But the young woman shook her head. No. And there was no bitterness in it, and no longing either. Only a quiet, settled peace. That farm was the old life. The life I had when I still believed the world kept its promises. It died with my father, and I grieved it, alone, in the dark of this very cave, for a whole long winter. She looked around her, at the warm gold light, at the patient pool, at the bowl set out, at the small worn things that marked the lives of the people who had found their way to her warmth. But this is the life I built, with my own 2 hands. The farm was given to me, and then taken from me, and I had no say in either. This is mine in a way the farm never was. I don't want the past back. I've made something better than the past. And so the farm went to someone else, and she never once regretted it. And that was the end of the old life entirely. She did not defeat the woman who had wronged her. She did something the old stories rarely tell of. She let the wrong go cold in her own hands, rather than pass it on. And in the letting go, she found a freedom that no farm and no fortune could ever have bought her. The old man came back to the hills one last time when the spring was full and the green had returned to the slopes. He came slowly, slower than ever before, and she saw at once, in the way he moved, in the new thinness of him, that the winter had taken something from him too, and that he had not climbed this trail to teach her anything this time. He had climbed it to see. She showed him what she had made, the warmth that gave itself away, the door that opened for the freezing ones, the chosen souls warmed and sent back stronger. She showed him the mother and the boy, who came running to press his small warm hand into the old man's and look up at him with round and curious eyes. She showed him the bowl set out, more than one now, always more than one. And the old man, who had kept this warmth a secret all his long life, looked at what she had done with the gift he'd given her, and his sharp old eyes went soft and wet and bright. I kept it to myself, he said quietly, all those years. Told myself the world would only ruin it. Told myself it was mine, and mine alone, the one thing that was truly mine. And maybe it was. For me, maybe that was what I needed it to be, an old man with nothing else. He looked at the boy, at the mother, at the warm, living thing the cave had become. But you turned it into a light for the lost ones. I never had the heart for that. You did. You opened the door for me, she said. All of this, it started with you opening one door for one freezing girl when you didn't have to. Aye, the old man said. And someone opened a door for me once a long way back when I was young and freezing and had nothing in all the world. Showed me this very warmth. Wanted nothing back for it. He smiled, faint and far away. That's how these things go, girl. That's the whole of how they go. Someone shows you the warmth, and then you show it to someone else. And the showing never ends, so long as there's one soul left with the heart to keep the door open. He did not stay long. He was tired, and he had said what he had come to say. And not long after, in the gentle warmth of the full spring, the old man laid down his long life and let it go, quiet and easy, the way a man lets go a thing he has carried far enough. She was with him at the end. She held his hand, the way she had once held the hand of a small frozen boy, the way she had once held the hand of a beaten woman by the pool. And she thanked him for the door, for the warmth, for the gift that had turned out, in the end, to be so much larger than a cave. Just passing it on, the old man said. His voice was thin, but his eyes were clear to the very last. Someone showed me. Now you'll show someone else. That's how these things work. And then he was gone. The seasons turned, as seasons do, and the warmth in the hills went on. She kept the door open, year upon year, winter upon winter. The boy grew tall and strong in the gold light of the spring, and learned, at her side, the careful art of telling the souls in true need from the souls who only meant to take. The mother grew old beside her, a friend to the very end, an equal who had seen her clear in the hardest hour and never once looked away. And the chosen ones kept coming, quiet and grateful and guarding the secret as fiercely as their own lives, the freezing and the forgotten and the cast aside, finding their way up a hidden trail toward a warmth that asked them only one thing, that someday, somehow, in whatever small way they could, they pass it on. She never went back to the farm. She never wanted it. She had found in a cold cave in a hard winter something the world could neither give her nor take away. She had learned that the cruelest thing that ever happened to her, being thrown away, cast out, left with nothing, had been the very thing that taught her what she was truly made of, and that the warmth she had been given had never been hers to keep, but only ever hers to pass along, and that the deepest payment for an unkindness is not to return it, but to refuse it, to break the long cold chain of it and put something warmer in its place. She thought of all of it, sometimes, in the quiet hours by the pool, the frozen street, the handful of coins, the woman with her hair pulled back so tight it stretched the kindness off her face, the trapper's restless eyes, the blue lips of a boy on the cold church steps, the black throat of the shaft, and the storm, and the knock that faded in the dark. Every one of those cold things had tried, in its own way, to make her smaller, to teach her that the world was a place where the strong kept their warmth and the cast-off froze. And every one of them had failed, because she had answered the cold again and again with the one thing it could never understand. She had opened a door. She did not become rich. She did not become famous. No one carved her name into any marker, and no story was ever told of her in any hall. But on the coldest nights of the hardest winters, when the wind came screaming down out of the high places and the cold reached its long fingers toward the ones with nowhere left to go, there was a warmth waiting in the hills, and a door that would open, and a woman, no longer young now, who had once stood freezing on a street with nothing in all the world, waiting on the other side of it, ready to pull a stranger in out of the dark and say the only words that had ever truly mattered. There's warmth here. Come in out of the cold. And somewhere in the steam that rose forever from that patient pool, in the warmth that wanted nothing back and gave everything and never once ran dry, the door stayed open, and the showing never ended.